You'd think communications from a software manager or director to their reports would be clear, concise, and unambiguous, given that people are usually working on projects that cost millions of dollars to execute with potentially billions of dollars on the line. Unfortunately, this isn't always the case. But how do you deal with that when you have a manager who gives you ambiguous directions? And what are some examples? Hi, I'm John Miller, the Deliberate Engineer. I spent 30 years working in industry. 15 of those years I was a principal engineer, and 13 I was a software manager of one sort or another. I've worked at lots of big tech companies including Microsoft, Amazon, Google, Oracle, and so on. Over those years I've been on a lot of projects, and a lot of them have had really great results. But I've also had my share of projects which had problems, and in this case specifically, problems with getting clear guidance from managers about the right way to proceed. Today I'm going to give you a couple examples of projects from my past where we worked for a while in the wrong direction because we either didn't understand guidance from the managers or we didn't listen closely enough. Now, my goal in telling these stories is both to show that it can really happen and also to give you some suggestions of how you can avoid these situations yourself. In 2015, I was working at a big tech company that was making a fresh cloud offering. Now, unlike companies like Google or Amazon or Microsoft, they weren't building everything piecemeal. Normally what you would do is build a couple services and then build a couple more, improving them all as you go. And there would be this sort of loose coupling between them that would have to be strengthened over time. In this case, we were getting to build the most critical services all at once, which meant we got to design them all at once. It was a real opportunity for us to build something that was a more cohesive service. To make sure that this project went well, they hired a lot of senior engineers from Amazon and from other companies and put them all to work designing and implementing these services based on their previous experiences. I joined this company as a principal level hire, working on identity and authorization services that would apply to all of the different cloud services that were being put together. I was part of a larger team working on identity and access control, and there was even another principal engineer on the team who I was working with on designing and implementing lots of the things that we were building. The goal was to put together a system that could be used to determine what you were allowed to do. For example, whether or not you were allowed to read or write a file, whether you were allowed to use a computing resource, how it was audited, and so on. This is actually a lot harder than it sounds like, mostly in terms of integrating with existing authorization systems and being able to manage it effectively. We came up with what I think is a pretty good story for access control in terms of simplicity and also correctness. And we went through a series of reviews with the upper management and executives in this company. This included an initial design review and then a full design review after we'd finished the design. We're starting on implementation, and then just as we were wrapping up implementation, another review. At the time, I thought all of these reviews went well. At each review, we presented the current state of the design, said where we were going, how far along things were, gave examples or demos of how things would fit together. We got a lot of interesting and good questions, and I felt like we did a good job of answering these technically. At the end of the reviews, almost as an afterthought, the main leader of this effort would ask a question. He would say, well, all this looks great. Have you thought about making it look more like some of the other authorization technologies, something much simpler? And we would always answer, well, yes, but then we'd lose this feature and this feature and this feature, so this is the direction we want to go. And he'd be like, okay. And the review would be over, and we would, each time think, well, things went pretty well, that's great. That is until that third review where we were almost done with the project. At that point, the big boss of the overall cloud effort said, look, this is just too complex. It needs to be simple. It needs to be like this other authorization technology. I was a little confused by this, so I said, well, are there any problems that you can see with this one? We've taken a lot of care designing it, and if we have to switch to something simpler, it's actually going to take us longer than it would just to finish what we're doing. He's like, nope, I don't see anything wrong with your existing technology, but you need to do something simpler, so do this. This was a little bit frustrating as an experience because I felt like we'd already gone through reviews twice before and had gotten the thumbs up to keep working on things. We'd spent almost a year as a team working on this at this point, and now we were going to have to undo most of the work that we'd done and actually spend longer adapting it to this new, simpler way of doing authorization than we had in mind. Now, looking back, what I realize is he gave us consistent feedback in each of these meetings. The problem isn't that he wasn't telling us what he was thinking. The problem is that we weren't listening closely enough. Now, certainly, the higher level managers could have done a better job of communicating that this wasn't just an idle comment. This was something they really wanted us to do. But the fact is, they gave us consistent feedback. We were very senior engineers, and I'd say there was a big takeaway from this for me. When you get a message more than once, even if it seems insignificant, if it's with a stakeholder, you want to go and circle back to that stakeholder and find out, hey, I heard you say this in the meeting, is this something, are you okay with the way we're going? And kind of get their explicit buy-off. We didn't do that, and we paid the price for it. My second example is from a lot further back when I was working in the Windows XP team on peer-to-peer technology. I was a development lead for the security model that we were going to use for the peer-to-peer technology. And as a result, I was putting together an authentication authorization model that would be used by the other different components such as PNRP, peer graphing, and peer grouping. Part of designing this security model and getting it integrated into those other components was getting the design reviewed by the senior technical members of the team, and also talking to the people who owned each of the other component teams to make sure that they were bought into the model. Most of the folks who ran the review past were fine with the design. When they had questions, we had answers at the ready for them, and we were able to describe what it could do and couldn't do and why we'd made the choices we made. A lot of the technical folks in the group were happy to leave the design decisions and the overall shape of it up to us as long as it met their requirements. However, one of the more senior component owners took a look, and in the review he said, well, I don't see anything wrong with it, but I don't like it. So I asked him, well, what don't you like? Is there something that should be different? Do you see a problem? And he was like, well, I don't see any problems, but it just doesn't feel right. For me, that wasn't actionable feedback. And so I sort of talked again and said, well, this is how we're doing it. Is it okay with you? And he was like, well, yeah, I guess. I took that as being agreement that the design could move forward. Now, again, the difference here is it wasn't a random developer who was raising a protest. I get that lots of the times. But this was a component owner who ultimately made the decisions about what his group would and wouldn't do. After we'd finished most of the work and had the component ready for integration with the other components, that component owner said, well, look, I don't like this design and we're not going to integrate with it. This was an unpleasant surprise to me because we'd already put several months into designing it and had gotten a fair amount of the way through implementing it. But this time, at least, when he came back, he said, I don't like the way this is. Here's why, and here's the way I want it to be for me to use it. Now, I don't remember exactly what happened. I think we reached some sort of compromise where, yes, we changed the shape of the security component, and he did adopt it and did wind up using it for his team's efforts. But again, this is a case where I thought we had agreement, there was a protest raised, and then I sort of talked through it, decided it wasn't that serious, and moved forward with something that wound up having to be changed later anyways. I promised there would be some lessons in this for you. So the real question is, how did this happen in the first place? And how do you keep it from happening to you? The single most important piece of advice I can give you for this type of situation is to listen very carefully to what the stakeholders are saying. Make sure you know who makes the decision about whether or not your component will be used and whether or not it will be shipped. Make sure you review your component with them. And if they raise objections, make sure you circle back to them. Ideally one-on-one with them, but it can also be just after the meeting or in some separate smaller meeting. Get together and say, hey, I heard your objections. I just wanted to make sure, do you think that we're going the right direction? Is this something that you would let us ship? Or do you think we really need to take a harder look at, for example, a harder look at simplifying things so that it more matches this other technology? If you have an explicit discussion like that, then you're addressing their concerns head on, and there's a more likely chance that you will resolve them one way or the other. After you feel like you've resolved the issue with that stakeholder, I would recommend documenting it somehow. You don't have to write up a formal legal document and get them to sign it. Instead, a typical thing that I would do is probably write up an email summarizing, hey, thanks for attending our review. We talked afterwards about this and this. What I heard was that this part is a concern, but that you're okay with us shipping what we have right now. Is that correct? Let me know if I misread this. It's a little painful, right? It's a little difficult to have these sort of explicit conversations with people, but it's a half hour of discomfort raising the issue and getting it put to bed versus potentially wasting an entire team's efforts for months or years because you weren't willing to have a half-hour difficult conversation. And that's it. Misunderstandings happen in business just like they happen in day-to-day life. It's really what you do to reduce the frequency of those misunderstandings and to resolve them when they happen that determines whether you're successful or whether you have lots more problems in your life. So I hope this advice has been useful to you. Thank you very much for watching the video and keep on pushing forward. Hi, this is John. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please think about subscribing so you get notified of my future videos. Also, if you are interested, you might want to check out the video I have linked here. Thanks, and keep on pushing forward.